president.
All right, so when you fight corruption, corruption does fight back. Now in studios to just have that conversation and break it down for us to understand, have we lost the fight really? I'm being joined by Mr. Marlon Agaba, the head of the programs, of course, head of programs at the Anti-Corruption Coalition Uganda, an organization that has been at the center of this fight for more than a decade now. Many thanks, sir, and welcome to Morning at 10 TV.
Thank you, and I'm happy to be here.
Thank you so much. Well, by the way, guys, if you missed out on that particular feature, be sure to head on to YouTube. The entire video is right there. Mr. Agaba, let's start off from this particular point. Are we so badly off? Have we lost the fight?
I must say that something is being done regarding the fight against corruption, but at the same time, I must say that to some extent, we are losing the fight against corruption. Because let me begin with, for instance, what has been done. I know, for instance, the government has tried to put in place some laws, and we do have quite so many laws. And Corruption Act, even the Constitution talks about corruption, leadership code act, and several others. Plus, of course, the institutions of government. We have the Inspectorate of Government, we have the Courts of Law, and even have the State House Anti-Corruption Unit. But now when it comes to the figures, unfortunately, we are increasingly not doing well, regionally or even globally. For instance, when you look at the Corruption Perception Index, conducted by Transparency International for 2018, Uganda was ranked in the 149th position out of 181 countries, with a score of 26%. Yes. Now, when you look at 26%, I mean, even in a normal class, normal system, if you get 26%, you have failed. So it means, and even when it comes to the region, like the Panama story highlighted quite well, I think Uganda was only doing better than Burundi and South Sudan, which of course those are countries that have had challenges. So yes, that we're not doing well. But also according to another report called the Global Financial Report for 2017, it shows that Uganda loses approximately $1 billion. That is, I think, over 3.7 trillion annually to corruption. And I've also seen these several corruption scandals, scandal after scandal, coming up. I mean, I don't need to mention them, but I've seen several scandals coming up. So it kind of gives you an idea in terms of the money that is being lost. But also as civil society, we have been tracking these scandals, corruption scandals. And between the years 2000 and 2015, we were able to track that at least 24 trillion had been lost through the different corruption scandals during that period of 15 years.
15 years.
Yeah.
And actually, I think that tallies with what a report, of course, given by Parliament, Ugandan Parliament in 2015. They're saying that in the past 10 years, Uganda has lost 24 trillion Uganda shillings in corruption.
Yeah, and that's quite a huge sum. And actually, our statistics are showing that money actually could have funded one of the financial year budgets. Okay. It's quite a huge sum of money.
Right. You know, I don't know if you looked at the papers this morning, and we're saying that what is warranted is that for the past 10 years, we've lost about 24 trillion Uganda shillings thanks to corruption. Now, in today's papers, we are having the court naming 100 government thieves in the last decade, last 10 years. And they're saying that they have been asked to return 70 billion to government, only 70 B. And they're saying that out of that 70 billion, they've been able to only recoup 1 billion. Now the question is it that we're having some fish that have not been netted out, so to speak, in terms of them that are perpetrating corruption? Because when you look at that disparity, we're talking of 24 trillion Uganda shillings, but this particular list is of people who have apparently stolen only 70 billion Uganda shillings.
Now, unfortunately, most of the corruption cases never make it to court. Most of the cases die out at the level of investigation. Some of them are even never investigated. I mean, I've had several scandals this year, including the refugee, the inflation of refugee numbers that made some donors to pull out. Stop funding, but has anybody been arrested or taken to court? And we have had several other scandals that have been going on. Now, the challenge with asset recovery, I know, for instance, the 70 billion is based on convictions, but the level of conviction is still, like I said, I mean, if 100 cases have happened or are registered, probably like 10% will end up in court. And from the 10%, probably like 2% will have what? The court will make orders for recovery.
Why is
but
that?
recovery,
Why is that?
of course, there are several processes. When you look at, for instance, asset recovery in Uganda, it's not quite well streamlined. It depends on the discretion of the judge. I think if you're charged with the Anti-Corruption Act, it depends on the discretion of the judge can order. I will give you an example. For instance, in the patient case, the judge made an order for the convicted to pay some money, I think around 50 billion. But when you look, for instance, like at the Katosi case, the people who were convicted were never ordered to pay back any money. So it is discretionary. And as civil society, I know, of course, and some sections in government, they have been advocating for having a much more comprehensive role of asset recovery. You know, I mean, if we are to win the war against corruption, we need to make corruption a little bit more expensive.
Right.
Because if somebody can serve time and get out and enjoy their money, then there is incentive on the other side.
Let me ask you a question. You know, of course, coming from the CSO facet, it's been a conversation that is rife, and I'm sure that all of you have interacted with this. Ugandans saying that even the court system is corrupt. So if the corrupt are, you know, manning the corrupt, then will we ever find justice? What ought to be done?
Yeah, true. I know several studies have alluded to that, ranking police and the courts as the most corrupt institutions. But you see, at the end of the day, we don't have to lose hope completely. Ideally, of course, courts are supposed to be a last resort. They're supposed to be a place of reprieve. And of course, when they get permeated with corruption, it's quite unfortunate. But you know, and you know, when you look at corruption, it has virtually permeated all sections of society.
Yes.
We're having scenarios where even children at school have to pay money to be elected head prefects or whatever, and they get the money from where? From their parents. You're having situations where even voters are demanding for incentives and money from politicians to vote them into office. And you see, so basically corruption has permeated all the different levels of society. And I think that if we are to win this war against corruption, that's to be a kind of attitude change, attitude shift.
Attitude shift.
Yeah.
You know, you've given this example of, and I think I interfaced with this, and I'm sure you also interfaced with this whenever we are having school politics, of course, to choose student leaders. And one would beg to ask, what is corruption? Because the students dish out money or goodies in the name of, it's just a thank you sign or symbol. So what exactly is corruption? Because even with the business facet, we are having a conversation right here. A majority give out kitu kidogo to have the processes of different, you know, issues to be fast-tracked, you know. So for example, if I want a certain document, I'll send someone and give them just, you know, facilitation money. And a majority don't deem that as corruption, but indeed it is corruption. So in your view, how would you define corruption?
Of course, more broadly, and at a global level, corruption is defined as misuse of office for personal gain. So if you have any office you are holding, by the way, not just even a public office, even a private office, if you misuse that office for your own personal gain, that can be deemed as corruption. But of course, we have the much more specific forms of corruption like bribery, like of course extortion, bribery, you have extortion, we have abuse of office, we have corruptly procuring tenders, there is also of course blatant theft of properties, and then of course increasingly we're having much more sophisticated forms of corruption like cyber crime, people stealing on the internet, trans-border crime, and syndicate corruption where different officials connive to steal funds. So it is very, very broad and it's quite complicated, but I think at the end of it all, if you're using the office that you're holding for your own personal gain, that can be deemed as corruption.
You know, the other question to you would be, now we have this list and we are counting down to Wednesday, where the president is expected to lead a procession or a walk to fight corruption. Of course, a majority have come out to say that, is this symbolism? Is it going to work? Is it the right strategy? In your view, as opposed to walking, what could have the president done? Do you think he was ill-informed on this one? Because we did the story, of course, yesterday. It was the big story as well in the Daily Monitor yesterday. And there was a lot of bashing coming from Ugandans who were pretty much disgruntled, saying that we don't need you to take a walk, we need you to act. So what's your take on this one?
One, walking is symbolic, of course. I think the president is trying to show commitment to fighting corruption. And I think, of course, I've already talked about the different donors withdrawing their funding, especially to the refugee support. So I think this is just symbolic. He wants to show that he's still committed. But definitely, there's no nation in the world where corruption has been reduced or even defeated through working.
Yes.
So we need a lot more action. And of course, what required from the president is leadership. The president has to show, yes, I know has been very good at rhetoric and talking, but he has to show that through action that something is being done. So we need the clear political will and political leadership to fight corruption. Yes, working, like I said, it's good, it's symbolic, it's good to show that you are committed, you are doing something, but defeating corruption would need a lot more than just working.
All right, let's break down that a lot more. If you're to advise the president today with regards to the action points he needs to leverage on to fight corruption, what would be your top 3?
Now, one, of course, I've been talking about the whole issue of political will, and the president has said that there is political will. But you see, political will is not just through talking. There has to be some level of action and leadership. When you look at the other countries that have been trying to do well in terms of fighting corruption, there has been that will. For instance, like in China, you know what is happening. Right. If you're found corrupt and you go through the court system, and you know the kind of penalties that are there. And I mean, so in Uganda, we need that kind of political will, zero tolerance to corruption. I know they are launching the zero tolerance to corruption policy on Wednesday as well, but we need that in action.
Yes.
But
so more stringent penalties.
Yeah, that's quite important. But also secondly, we have talked about the whole issue of recovering some of these monies. The law we have right now is not quite clear on asset recovery, and of course it hasn't made corruption a very risky venture. So we need to have very clear law on asset recovery. If you are convicted, by the way, sometimes even before you are convicted, if you cannot prove that you own the properties that you have, or you earn those properties genuinely, those properties can be taken away from you. So we need to make corruption more expensive. That is through people being able to forfeit the properties that they have gotten illicitly. But also, I know some government departments have been trying to bring out the whole issue of lifestyle audit. Yeah, for instance, if you're earning $1 million or $2 million and you have worked for 10 years, how can you own a hotel of 20 billion, not even one, sometimes 2 or 3?
Right.
I mean, if you cannot prove ownership of such properties, then the government should be able to take away those properties. But also, when again, coming back to the whole issue of political will, I mean, their government agencies are supposed to be fighting corruption, but what is the level of support that the government is giving these agencies to fight corruption? Of the Inspectorate of Government, that of course has several challenges that have been well highlighted in terms of capacity, in terms of funding, and even in terms of staffing. What is the government doing to address those gaps? Instead of creating a parallel unit of government to do what? To fight corruption.
Which, by the way, they're saying is actually doing amazingly well.
Yes, it is trying.
Let's just giving out the statistics. They're saying that so far they've registered 58,400, of course, corruption complaints. They're moving on to say that by 2018 December, they were able to conclude 8,022 cases. Now they move on to say that 4,017 complaints are under investigations currently. Then 35,280 cases have been referred to the relevant ministries, of course, and agencies, government agencies. And that's where my question lies, you know, because when you look at the IGG, again, on the flip side, I had these particular numbers right here. When you compare to them to, the, of course, the State House Anti-Corruption Unit, they're saying that they were able to work out the numbers within a given, you know, kind of capacity of 28 employees. This is the IGG. And of course, the numbers could not match with this one. Now, the question is, don't you think the State House Anti-Corruption Unit, headed by Lieutenant, of course, Edith Nakalema, was warranted? Because she's doing amazingly well so far.
One, I must say that I'm happy about the level of swiftness that the State House Anti-Corruption Unit is using. I mean, what people want to see, when they report cases, they want to say that something is being done, which of course wasn't happening previously with the Inspectorate of Government. I think at some level, the Inspectorate of Government had become too detached from the ordinary citizen. It had become too bureaucratic and too government. So I think that's why the president brought in the State House Anti-Corruption Unit to be able to fill in the gap. But you see the unit, I mean, if an agency of government has challenges, do you create another agency? And what happens if that agency also has, gets the same kind of challenges?
Right.
Will you create another agency to monitor it? So I think, of course, we do welcome all the different efforts to fight corruption, but I think the president as well should look at the challenges and the issues that have made the Inspectorate of Government to fail to do its mandate. And looking at these figures, yes, I think they are quite impressive figures. But when you say that you have concluded 8,000 cases, how have you concluded them? I know this unit is barely 2 years in office. And you see, averagely, to have a conviction, even for a corruption case, I think probably it would be an average of 2 years or 2 years and a half to get it. So from the 8,000 cases, have we had any convictions? Has any money been recovered? I mean, how many have the cases gone to court? How have the cases been concluded? I think that's another question that we need to be asking, not just looking at the figures and get excited, but also we need to know that, yes, much as this unit is there, but there have also been questions of its legality and its mandate, because I know it doesn't have any, there's no clear law that puts it up. And of course, the president has the discretion to set up the different units, but I think there is need for a very clear law to show its mandate. And also to know that it also works through agencies of government. Yeah. So partly, I think some of these cases could have been channeled through the police, or the DPP, or even the Inspectorate of Government.
You know, I agree with you, because the big question is how were they concluded? Why didn't we see a lot of noise around that? And of course, we're having the outgoing IGG, of course, Justice Irene Mulia-Gonja, saying that she's proposing for another law to be, taken up. Of course, she's saying that there has to be the civil asset forfeiture faction within the law, so that you can be able to retrieve these assets from these people. But my question to you is, of course, speaking at political will as one of the pointers, action points for the president to fight corruption, do you think this is going to take off?
Of course, the non-conviction based forfeiture law, I mean, this one, the way it works is that even if you're not convicted, if you cannot prove that you own the assets you do, then the state can take them away. It's a good initiative, it's a welcome initiative, but to have the same challenges. If the environment is still the same, I mean, to have the same challenges. And then the other question you need to know is that who owns these properties that you want to take away? Who is the owner?
Who owns the properties?
And then secondly, who will make the law that will take away these properties? Are they part of the people who own these properties? So it's a very big question, and like I said, we need to first address the bigger question of political will and having a real will to fight corruption before we even talk about these laws. Because first of all, I think Uganda, we're not doing badly in terms of laws. And several assessments have been done, and we have been ranked quite well in the 90s, by the way, in terms of having laws. But the problem has always been implementation of these laws. So even if you have good laws, they will be on the shelves, they will gather dust on the shelves. But without will to implement them, then we're just wasting time.
We're just wasting time. Thank you so much for coming through, Mr. Malo Nagaba, the head of programs at the Anti-Corruption Coalition Uganda. Of course, it is an organization that has been at the center of fighting corruption for quite, is it a decade now, 10 years plus. And of course, hashtag Morning at NTV is where we can engage. Where do we think we can start with the fight against corruption? And also your views with regards to the Wednesday walk, anti-corruption walk. All right, so I do have Mr. Stephen Bide on standby with the traffic.